so much, Dr. Allen, for that talk, because we have had a very active WhatsApp group on the side, and all of us are basically gushing over every question that we as panelists intended to ask you. You've already addressed that. I think we loved hearing more about your repatriation efforts and also the story maps that you've used. So if you could please talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, so can I show you something?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I need to share, and I need to share this, I think, and I need to stop that, and I need to, oops, no, I don't want that. You can see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so what do I want? Oh, actually, I don't want that. I want something else. Okay, so we launched a journal, and mostly it's for manuscripts and inscriptions. So this is, I'm going to take a little time to load. Okay, so this is an object. So we have, and let me just do something else, which is, okay, so the base of this object has an inscription. It's as you can see, it's just loading now. It's a Buddha image. It was acquired recently and loaned. It's in private collection, loaned to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Now, this program that you see here is something called Read, and is that going to do that? It's not going to go full screen. It's a bit slow, but essentially, so if I select a word, it's going to select the Kharoshthi characters. So remember, we're reading right to left. And then it's going to tell me here, because I've produced this, I've linked the edition with the image. It's going to tell me that this is a masculine word, paguna. It's the Sanskrit equivalent is this, and it's a month, actually month name. It's genitive singular, so it's going to tell me the grammar of that. And it's too slow to show you now, but you know, I draw up a translation I've made and so on. Now, that is, so the Metropolitan Museum Art produced this 3D image, right? So one of the problems you face as art historians and so on is you mostly can only encounter this type of material through books, you know, or you go to the museum, it's behind a glass thing. So, you know, you have something like this. The detail is extraordinary for, you know, studying the object. And then, so we applied that segmenting of the letters in the text to our objects. So here is going to tell me this is an Ushnisha, and then you know, you can expand this in any way. This is still very much a prototype. You know, that Hale in this 1974 publication said it's this and this, and this is rather simple, but you know, you can record different scholars, different scholars have said about these features. And then this is sort of a background story, basic article on that. What else have I got that's here? Museum catalog, annotated image. I just want to, this is better. So yes, so okay. this, for example, now this object is in private hands but on loan to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So by doing this, this can make this available to the Pakistanis, Afghanis. Probably this comes from Pakistan. Now it's all the materials in English at the moment, but it could be in Pashto or Urdu. And one of the problems you go to, say, this happens in India as well, but you go to museums in Pakistan, and you see the label. Often it's just inadequate. It's either wrong or it's inadequate. I really think most Pakistani students would go there, have no idea what's a bodhisattva, what's a this, what's a that. They just don't have that background. And it would be possible to have, say, an interactive display next to an object whereby you are clicking on something, and this will tell you. Now this is rather simple, but you can have it as complex as you want. What is the English translation of the inscription, and so on. So that would be a way of having within a museum a means by which your visitors could interact better with that object. And then, as I mentioned, we have a story map now. I don't think I can bring it up easily, but the story map was created by one of my students who's now the lecturer of Sanskrit at the Australian National University. Her father worked in the advertising industry and helped her produce it, and basically gives a background to Gandhari manuscripts. So this again is an overview that's more comprehensible to an ordinary, more general audience, and that can be translated, and we aim into Urdu or Pashto. So most people in Pakistan would not be able to access scholarly publications or know much about this heritage. There are local Pakistan publications, but this is a way these are ways by which leading edge scholarship can be made available to a much wider audience. So in some ways, this we refer to this as digital repatriation. Like this object, it's in private collection on loan to the Met Museum. It's unlikely to be returned to Pakistan. That's where it came from, but it can be digitally repatriated. So that's something we were interested in. So I'm going to just go back here and stop sharing. There. Okay.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Because one of the things that we do here at Speaking Archaeologically is a project called Project Gandhara. We've been working on it since 2017. And we're trying to digitally reunite all the Gandharan artifacts from different countries across different museums. So yes, we're creating a database, and we encounter all these inscribed objects, like you said. And most museums that we encounter them in, some really obscure ones in India as well, that not a lot of people know about anyway, don't have any sufficient tags, like you said. They've no idea what the inscription says. Most people can't read Kharoshthi or for that matter, Brahmi. And there is no translation available. So what I wanted to also ask is, are you doing something similar for Brahmi artifacts as well? Because I know you read Brahmi.
Yes.
Are you doing something similar for that as well?
Life's a little bit short, and there's so much, the sort of limitation of time. So my focus is really on Gandhari. But some of our students, so one of Richard Solomon's students is Michael Skinner. He did his doctorate at University of Washington on Kushan inscriptions, which include Brahmi and Kharoshthi inscriptions. And it was really about Kushan history. A very good PhD. You can get it through the University of Washington Library website. So that's something he works on. In terms of uniting collections, and as far as I'm aware, I don't think there is. So the Andrew Glass, who was at University of Washington, now works for Microsoft, and former student, and Stefan Baums, was at University of Washington, now University of Munich, they've created the Gandhara.org, which is a site which has a catalogue of all published Gandhara material, inscriptions, coins, manuscripts, documents, and so on. And they're in the process of creating a dictionary and a bibliography. It's an immensely good, really important source. So basically that unites in one place, digitally and searchable, all Gandhari inscription, materials that has been published, not this huge amount unpublished, right? I don't know of any project to do the same with Brahmi ones. Now, there are some projects to, look at Sanskrit inscriptions in, say, Cambodia, or, people working on inscriptions in this site or that site. So, I think before I met you, I was in Gandhari near Mumbai, and there's a international team of Americans, Japanese, French, and so on, working on that site, art historians, and also the inscriptions. Vincent Tonnier at Munich, he's French though. So, maybe you'll end up with a corpus, but, across a region, even across pan-India, that's a massive project. The sheer size of that collection would be massive. So I'm not aware of anything along those lines.
Well, we look forward to at least this project and following it. So just quick questions that we've had. One of them is, how can one learn Pali or Prakrit if they wanted to learn it from you? So is there a way that you can you're making this available to people in the region? People
Yes.
who might not have access to you through the university, for example?
Yes. So I don't teach online at the moment. I'm just so busy. I'm trying to teach here. I have to teach. I've got obligations at university, but I have been conducting Gandhari workshops. So, I've done them in Rome and Pisa. I just came back in May from doing one at the University of Tokyo, and the largest one I've done was actually at Pune. That's how come I came to be in India. And when I met you, that was 2 months in the Department of Pali and Buddhist Studies, headed by Mahesh Deokar, and it was a Gandhari. So that was introducing students there to Gandhari. Say the workshop I just did in Tokyo, well, there was a young student there who was really keen, and he's visiting here under his own steam for a month, and we're reading text together. So that's all unofficially, right? Now, I don't know of any online courses in Gandhari, but within India itself and in, say, Oxford, or there are certainly courses in studying Prakrit and Gandhari, not Gandhari, but certainly Pali and Prakrit. And, really the basis for, commanding Gandhari would be Sanskrit. So, they're closely related, but Sanskrit is so, the spelling is standardized, it's transparent, it's, the basis, the earlier form of those Indic lines of languages. And, that, I think, studying Sanskrit and Pali would be a good basis, and then to shift to Gandhari. You just can't launch into Gandhari. One is, I didn't really talk about that, but, the pleasures and difficulties of dealing with Gandhari manuscripts and languages. One, the manuscripts are fragmentary. Two, the language, the spelling was never standardized. So the scribe will spell the same word differently in the same sentence, right? There's no space between words. The Kharoshthi script was imperfect in that they didn't mark what are called geminates, so double T, double N, they just marked one. They didn't mark long vowels, so, in those Indic languages, you've got I, and so on. They don't mark the long ones. They also, the morphology, some of it's breaking down, so you can't tell the difference between nominative, which marks the subject of the sentence, accusative marks the object of a transitive verb, locative marks place, which is very clear in Sanskrit and Pali. In Gandhari, final vowel is weakening, and a scribe will write any vowel, right? So it could be like, say, Sanskrit would be the man, subject of the sentence would be naraha, the object would be naram, locative would be nare. Well, in Gandhari, that could be, all of them could be nara, nara, no, naru, nare, whatever, right? So it makes the language quite difficult. And I think we think in terms of Sanskrit and Gandhari, of Pali, yeah. So that would be.
Thank you so much for that.
Yep.
So we're now going to start our Q&A session with the audience. And joining us for the Q&A is my associate, Simran Kaur Saini. Simran will be conducting the Q&A session for this particular lecture. So Simran, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And thank you so much, sir, for this insightful lecture. I think, as ma'am already stated, we just had so much to discuss. What really spoke to me was the collaborative nature of your project, especially considering that we are looking at collaborations increasingly in our field, not just across professions, but even across different kinds of publics. So some questions from my end in regards to that. When we are looking at using digital tools in enabling these collaborations, enabling digital repatriation, what challenges do you face, especially considering the fact that these countries where we're doing these face a significant digital divide?
Yes. Look, in terms of setting up collaborations, it is a different world in that, it took me 3 years to put the agreement in place between my university and the Department of Archaeology Museum. Now, my university administration, that's slow. Administration in Pakistan was slow. Getting things done, as you might be aware, I had to actually be there. So after that time, it just wasn't going anywhere. So I just rang the secretary of the big department that DOAM sits under, said, I'm coming, she got together and she didn't know about it because the secretaries had all changed over the last 4 years. We had COVID in between. And so just took a huge amount of effort to push it through. That's just a different culture. Emails not answered, WhatsApp is the way to communicate. Learning to act in that space. So the digital is actually not that important there. It's really being face to face and getting down, meeting people and pushing things along. So collaboration is mostly, well, that's just between ourselves and the Pakistani partners, of which there are many. But, in this case, so as you saw, a project like this can only be collaborative. I've been the main sort of actor, but I depend really heavily on well-informed and more senior scholars than myself, who I run we hothouse ideas. How do we do with this, right? Then who do we approach to raise money for this project? Which conservators are best, how, and so on and so on. So each, bringing, and that's a pleasure to work in that environment, which is each person, each has different talents. So there's not a huge digital component there. But, as we progress now, and now that we want to make that the digital tool, so developing the digital tools, first of all, I'm really not a digital humanist, digital person. I'm a textual scholar, and you see, what I do. But one of my a guy came to me, wanted to do a master's degree, so he did it. He owns an IT consultancy company. He just he was interested in Buddhism, do it for fun. So he did a thesis on Gandhari reliquary inscriptions, and being a digital person, he did a very digital project. And then all of the digital resources, I didn't really show you them in detail, but that's all driven by him and his company. And, but neither of us could have produced that independently. He needs a scholar like me, and I need a digital person like him. And then there's all these other people who are involved. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. And I think just adding on to that, I really liked how the project, focuses on building capacities for the local organization. So it's not something that's short term. You're looking at a long-term development, giving them the right,
Yeah.
making them the primary stakeholders in safeguarding their heritage. So I just want to know if the project had further plans in terms of engaging the wider local community as well. So not just the professionals, but just common people who might be interested in knowing a little bit more about this heritage.
Yeah. Look, so the digital tools and this idea of digital repatriation now, of course, Gandhari scholars are or Gandharan scholars in Pakistan are important so they can access this material. But we very much have in mind, the visitor to the museum. And so on, which is, my experience in Pakistan, I've been there many times now, is people are really interested in this material. And the government itself is interested in promoting Gandhara because they're interested in developing tourism. As we said, when you go to a museum, the ordinary visitor would just go away just not knowing very much. And it's, you can look at it aesthetically, but there's really no background to that. And that's an audience worthwhile sort of engaging with. And we hope that our tools will be useful for that. That's also something that, I would hope, and I think the, Pakistani museum peoples and archaeologists are interested in. That's, I don't speak or read Urdu or Pashto, so, that's something that's their responsibility to run with. And I think, if we can provide those tools and so on, then fantastic.
No, I think that's a great idea, especially when you mentioned that, in the future you might want to provide possible translations of those pages rather than
Yes.
English. And considering how diverse Pakistan is in terms of languages,
Yes.
that will also help tap into various audiences. So yeah, I would really be looking forward to it in the future.
Yeah.
So just taking questions from the audience now. So a research wing member Vedha has a question. What are the methods and difficulties faced during the conservation of these manuscripts?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I went there at the beginning of beginning of July. The conservation space wasn't finished, so I went there to try to finish it for the arrival. I'd set up the arrival of the two conservators mid-July to work for 3 weeks, and the space wasn't ready. We had no tables, nothing. So, that was just the challenge of getting that done. Things just moved slowly. When they arrived, it wasn't finished, but it was you saw a picture, it was adequate to work in. So we borrowed some ordinary tables, not the special tables we wanted, and we started working. Now, first of all, it's unpredictable a little bit how the bark will behave. So, we know the method. It's been done before of conserving manuscripts. Doing that now. Some manuscripts behave well, take on moisture, and they are relatively easy to conserve. Others, it took quite a few days of humidification. Then you would have to unravel a bit and then put it back in the humidifier and so on. And, as you unravel it, you saw the little glass sort of microscope files that are placed on top to just weigh it down. The manuscript's starting to dry out. So, you've got to act very, quickly. It would have been very useful to have had what's called a ultrasonic humidifier. And Vanier's company had sort of sent one, and it just got stuck in customs. It still isn't there, right? So we didn't have it. So, and then I ordered some borosilicate glass from, you can't order it in Pakistan. So ordering materials was really a problem. I was in Rome before it. I ran around gathering Borodine and Sympathex and whatever and bringing it with me. And then, ended up ordering the borosilicate glass from China. Was questioned, would that arrive in time? And then there was something, you saw this pink sort of plasticky sheets. It's called plastizote. And it's just, you put the glass frame on top and then make a window, and around it just keeps it stable. I could order in Pakistan, but it arrived with dirty marks all over it. So I had to send it back, and then it came back, and it was, it was like, it's cost money to bring those conservators there. They were there for 3 weeks. It was 40 degrees, right? So it was not easy working. I mean, in the museum, we had air conditioning and so on. So just the physical nature of it, getting things together. Luckily, it all came together. It was an immensely productive time, but, it sort of just came together at last moment. We managed. So lots of challenges, and there will be. Cost is another big issue. So, it's expensive to bring trained conservators in. So I'm still looking. We raised some funding for further funding. So, for this project. So lots of challenges, but slowly get there. Yeah.
I think just carrying forward from the challenges, really, Anshika, one of our other members, asked, is there any way to preserve the manuscripts after they have been destroyed due to natural or other causes?
Depends. If they're destroyed. So how destroyed are they? I mean, if you can preserve them, do you mean before, like to prevent them being destroyed, or if they're being damaged?
I think if you could answer both.
Okay, so right now you saw that actually virtually all of these collections have been come into our awareness and, through clandestine digs of archaeological sites. This is tragic, right? So, Pakistan does a reasonably good job of looking after its archaeological sites, but it's really pushed for resources, and it can't guard all of them. Afghanistan's a totally different case. It's been chaos there for a long time, and a lot of it's the antiquities trade's huge, and that's tragic because we totally lose all the contextual information. The process of handling and mishandling mostly damages the manuscripts as they progress through the antiquities line. The only solution to that, and we can't do much about it, would be, were these countries given the resources and tools to look after sites to prevent that. So, to have enough attendance at archaeological sites to stop them being, pillaged, to, and so that's hypothetical. That's a lot of resources and so on. The other is, the manuscripts you're looking at, most of them, many of them, have been damaged in the process of discovery and then transmission through the antiquities trade. Again, what can we do with that? We that's something that can only change if the state in a country, a region, can change. In terms of conservation, well, we're using state-of-the-art to conserve it. What you saw between glass, and then once that's conserved, having high-quality digital images, that's permanent record as long as digital images last, of course. But that's the best we can do, I think.
I think, as you said, especially about digital images, I think this is also the point where would you feel that photogrammetry becomes an important tool, really, to record them in case we're not able to save them for the future?
Well, photogrammetry is usually for 3D objects, right? Three-dimensional objects. So
Yeah.
art historical objects, and that's certainly the case. For manuscripts, these are two-dimensional once they're conserved. And the British Library, who conserved the first two collections to have been discovered, it took regular high-quality color images, digital images, and infrared. Now you get a slight distortion, and if you have a big manuscript, you have to take it in sections. What we found is that, so I experimented with this, that the best for manuscripts is actually a 3D scanner, and we tend to restrict the size of the glass frame to that or less, because if it's getting bigger, it's more fragile. And, so I experimented first with this really high quality scanner at 2400 DPI, and the images were extraordinary, right? You could hone in on the way the ink had sort of spread on the bark and whatever. I found the files were too heavy, so we now scanning at 1600 DPI. So the quality, this is by far the best means of recording it, but I don't think there is such a thing as an infrared flatbed scanner, so we'll probably bring in an infrared photographer for that.
Thank you so much for that. Another question that Akanksha had, another one of our research wing members, is that do you think private collections, like those discussed, limit the scope of research? How and in what ways, and how can this be mitigated?
Yeah, look, this is one of the core problems with the whole antiquities trade is these objects should not be in private collections, right? Now, private collectors do, some of them at least, make their collections available to scholars. So some of these went into public collections, like the British Library, Library of Congress has some went into private collections. Public realm, of course, they're public. The private, however, is, it is a problem. So I showed you manuscripts. These are Sanskrit birchbark manuscripts from the Gilgit region that are in Virginia or Japan, right? So there's a scholar in Munich, Uwe Hartmann, who heads a project to study those, but they weren't conserved properly and some of them are stuck together. And the owner, these are people who, they can't read them. They just want to collect something ancient, right? So he doesn't want to spend the money on it and couldn't care much, right? This is really unfortunate. And, those manuscripts belong in Pakistan. They clearly come from the Gilgit area. And, in the long term hopefully that would be maybe repatriated to Pakistan and housed at the museum, and the conservation space we build can be used to conserve them. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. I had another question by Shruti. She asks, what does the presence of Greek mythological figures, such as Hercules and Tyche, alongside Buddha imageries, signify about the religious values of the people of the region?
Yeah, look, that's an interesting topic, of course. Question of, did the Greeks have any impact on Buddhism or Indian religion generally? Now there was a joint conference between my university and JNU a couple of decades, some years ago, and the topic was the heritage of Alexander the Great in India. And I presented on these manuscripts and whether there was any evidence of influence of the Greeks, and I couldn't find any, right? That is, and I think because the Greeks were a ruling minority and they tended to adapt to local customs. So Gandhara was the only place in Punjab where the Greeks issued bilingual coins, Greek on one side and, Indian language on the other. And the other is that Buddhism was a very well-developed, sophisticated religion by the time it encounters the Greeks. So, for the most part, it seems to me that the Greekness you encounter in art imagery is sort of a stylistic overlay. Now, some would argue that some Greek stories came into to the Buddhists and then vice versa. Some even thought that, the Greek texts were translated into, say, Gandhari or whatever. We have no evidence for that. So now some have argued, so Johannes Bronkhorst was at Lausanne, that there's only two places where you get philosophy, namely in Europe, based on the Greeks, and then in India, and that India actually got its philosophy from the Greeks. And this is controversial, of course, and I'm sure most Indian philosophers would think otherwise. But it also depends on what you define as philosophy. But so yeah, ideas all the time of what the influence of the Greeks was on India.
Thank you so much. And it's just quite interesting as well to think in that way, considering it's such a lingering questions. How much influence did the Greeks have in informing the art and
Yep.
culture and the manuscripts? And manuscripts that way just form such an important source because they offer a different perspective altogether. Um, Another question. So this is going back to the reconstruction of manuscripts and AI. So two related questions. The first one is, what methods or techniques do you use to interpret incomplete manuscripts or inscriptions on fragments? How do you reconstruct that missing information?
Yes. So you're lucky if you are dealing with a text that has a parallel in another version belonging to a different school. It won't be identical, but it will be similar in Sanskrit or Pali or even Chinese translation, because that can guide you, right? But there is a lot of literature or texts in these collections which has no parallel, which seems to be local Gandharan productions. And that's more problematic. But, as you work with these manuscripts, you understand that, this sequence of letters is likely to represent this, and you think in Sanskrit, say, and, this makes this, words stand out that, names of people, certain, things that, you can tell what action's going on and so on. You can recognize this verb. So there's a lot of speculation and alternative interpretations in a text like that, right? So I don't work on them, but in the British Library, there are these very brief sort of like rough notes, outlines of stories, right? The merchant so-and-so had a slave girl or daughter of a slave girl named Puniga, and the Buddha didn't want to, he wanted to leave. He'd spent the 3 months rain retreat in a town. The townspeople couldn't convince him to stay. Puniga managed to do so, fill out the rest of the story, right? So those ones there, that actually has a parallel elsewhere, that story, but many of them don't. And just knowing what's going on can be really a problem. So that's the nature of Gandhari, particularly with the peculiarities of non-standardized spelling, grammar, and then you've got to deal with a fragmentary manuscript. So, you deal with a Sanskrit manuscript, generally, what's going, even if half a word's missing, you can imagine what the rest is. Gandhari, you can't always do that, and a lot of the discussion is, well, I might spend 3 pages to explaining one word, the possible interpretations of it, and what that.
That's so true, and I think this was a problem that we were also encountering when we were dealing with the Sanchi inscriptions here, although they have been deciphered, but just seeing the alternative interpretations, and in some instances they're also destroyed in a way, and you can't figure out some characters now. So this is really helpful. I think we're moving towards the last set of questions now, because it has been very long for you. But just coming back to the whole topic of AI, so we have, you have in a way answered how AI can be useful in dealing with these inscriptions. But Bhavya asks, are there any softwares we can use at student level to aid in deciphering the manuscript text?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
just for students generally.
yeah. Look, this might be more advanced in, say, Sanskrit manuscripts, because it's a more transparent and known language, standardized spelling, etc. And I'm sure that there's scholars, and there's in India and elsewhere that are doing this. AI, well, dealing with fragmentary manuscripts in which the peculiarity is Gandhari, I would think that would be a long way off. First of all, you need, AI might help you reconstruct a manuscript, but there's so many variables and problems. To me, it's a very human thing. Yeah, so I'm not too certain how far we can use it, at least at the moment. Yeah.
Oh, that's so true. And I think these are the conversations that we have recently started to have around AI, considering how it has very much started to enter our lives now, especially in terms of research and everything. And just the whole idea about the translations as well, we're still yet not sure how accurate those translations will be,
Yes.
even if we take the case of Google Translate. So this would be an interesting area to explore in the future, as
Very,
we see.
yeah.
So, if there are any last questions from anyone, I think it was, I'm reiterating this again, but this was such an interesting talk and such an insightful session. I think we can just keep on asking questions and keep on discussing so many things.
Good.
But I think it would be best to stop now, and I'm pretty sure we can mail you the rest of the questions that there are
Great.
there. So,
Okay.
handing
Thanks
over
for
to Ma'am
inviting.
now.
Yep.
Well, thank you for accepting the invite because, like we've all been talking about in the backstage, we're so excited about this talk because it encapsulates a lot of things that we also aim to do at Speaking Archaeologically. We're all about digitally making things available to people who are actual stakeholders. We're all about digitizing stuff. We're all about also making things very, very accessible to the general public and creating platforms which can sort of bridge the gap between the heritage and the heritage enthusiasts. So thank you so much for being here with us today, tonight, this afternoon. And I hope everybody who is in the audience had a great time learning. We sure did. We have, oh, there's a question. So we have one last question, which goes, is there any such written document on the cult of Hariti? Any such discoveries, especially talking about transcultural assimilation of
Yes.
8 other baby gods?
Yeah, actually, I don't believe Hariti features in manuscripts, but I would need to check that. I'm not aware of it. As you know, she's depicted in Gandhara, what seemed to be important, in the form of Taik Fortuna, some beautiful images. And she, my understanding is that, she was a malevolent, being in Rajgir, would come into town and grab a little child every day to feed her 500 kids, and the Buddha tamed her. And that same story gets set up in Gandhara. And, I believe she became associated with preventing smallpox for children and so on. You would find images in monasteries. That's how come we find them. But in textual sources, I'm not aware of any so far.
All right. Thank you for that quick question, which was rather urgent from one of our audience members.
Okay, great.
But like I said, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you so much, Dr. Allon, for accepting our invite. We look forward to talking more with you in the future, if you're open to it and if you're happy to do it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just let us know what would be a good time. And there's just so much to discuss, I think.
Okay.
So thank you so much, everybody. Happy learning. And we will make this talk available to you soon. One slight comment, if there are questions that you need us to take still, you can post it below the link once the talk becomes available, and we'll get back to you on that. So thank
Okay.
you so much, everybody. Thank you once again, Dr. Allon. Have a
Bye-bye.
good day or a good evening. Bye-bye.